Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Dougie's Dungeon Podcast. Today we have Meg the Sorceress here. So why don't you go ahead and shout yourself out?
Um, hi, I'm Megan. And I am Meg the Sorceress pretty much everywhere.
Did you want to shout out your like specific social medias that you have, like TikTok and everything
Um,
like that?
I'm mainly on TikTok. That is my main thing. I'm currently starting up like Instagram and Twitter, but mainly TikTok.
Awesome. So we definitely have, from what we've talked before, we definitely have like different DMing styles, and so I kind of want to talk to you about that. So, how do you create NPCs from scratch? Let's start there.
So if I'm making an NPC that will like not be coming up super often, I generally just use the tables they have in Xanathars, or just
Okay.
like use like take a character from like a movie and like change the name and like accent a little bit and then just put them in the game. If I'm making a long-term NPC who will like be reoccurring many times, then I make it in a very like player type way where I design it like a character because that's what all the guides are online. And because of that, uh, I end up with like a lot of NPCs who are kind of like my character, and then I have their plan if there is no party, and then I just change their plan depending on what the party is,
So that's
and that's
interest.
how I.
So that's interesting. So when you even make like consistent like characters for your campaigns, you make them from the ground up, like an actual character?
Most of the time,
Chat
but
saying, go ahead.
I only I only do that with like NPCs that will be coming back again and again. Like right now in my party, there is one character who the party has adopted and they're traveling with, and so that character I have like a full backstory like a player would. And then also I have a party of villains, and each one of them I have a like full backstory of because I just like making characters.
I don't do that at all. Like obviously we have different methods. Chat's saying that they do something similar to you and like rivals and allies and stuff, but I don't. Like even when I have a consistent NPC, I find it much easier for me to just be like, all right, I just want these effects from this character. Like I just want this character to have like lightning bolt and that's their signature. And so like that I'll just be like, I don't care what level they are, they can cast lightning bolt. And so that's kind of how I approach NPCs. It's just like, what do I want this NPC to accomplish in the game? And because I find like creating characters from the bottom up, I personally fall into the very steep slope of my precious setting syndrome or like DMPCs. And so I had to stop doing that because um, I was having the issue of just like, oh, I don't want my character to die. It was like, it's not your character. I'm like, I know, but I don't want them to die because I spent so much time on them. So it's just interesting. Doesn't that take a lot of like extra time for dungeon mastering out of your, the a lot of time that you have?
It definitely does. One thing that has assisted with it is first off, I've just done it a lot of times, so now I've gotten very quick at doing it. Um, I will also like brainstorm things during the session occasionally. Like a thought will come to me and I would just write it down. But also, a big thing is I am in college and I had a 5 month summer pretty much
That's a
where
lot
I
of
was able to
time.
come up with a lot of different characters. And so now I just occasionally will take a character from one of the backstories I created and I'll just put them in the game.
Yeah, chat's saying got that free time. But to answer the question that was asked towards me, even my major NPCs, yes, I create even my major NPCs that way in like this kind of haphazard, lazy, lazy way. And that's specifically one. It's way easier for me. Like I'll just throw on hit points, and I've gone into other videos before, like how I handle hit points differently than everything. Like I have static hit points that never change for everything in the game, And so like that's not necessarily an issue with statting things out. I'll just be like, they have this amount of hit points, they have this ability, they can attack with this. I don't need their stats, I don't need their class abilities because I'm just going to give them whatever I want anyway. I don't feel the need to fully stat a character out. But that's just what I do. Um, so you said Xanathar's guide, correct? You use Xanathar's
Yeah.
guide a lot. You want to go into detail about like how that's helped you? Because I personally don't use that at all, obviously. So it'd be great for the listeners.
So I don't have any of like the older resources if there were any. So I kind of just have like the modern things. But in it they have a bunch of tables for like making NPCs. And I'll generally just look over it and look for ideas from it. I don't actually like roll on the tables, but a lot of good things there that you can pull from. And that's mainly what I do if I'm making like a short term NPC.
Just like using all the roll tables and stuff. That's Yeah. I mean, I've used a lot of roll tables as well, but I kind of just will come up with them on my own beforehand. I'll like I said with NPCs, I don't really flesh them out other than what I want them to do. So pivoting from that, like how do you incorporate your NPCs into your setting? Do you have like a method that you use for like do you have like setting specific NPCs that you use consistently, or do you just kind of like have a general idea of what you want in your setting and then flesh out NPCs after with that way?
More the second thing.
Okay.
This is my first like long time campaign, so that is a bit different. But I generally just kind of make up NPCs and then I don't really have them in mind like beforehand.
Okay. So what do you do with your setting to make it different? Because I know you do a lot of homebrew as opposed to um, like actual like pre-written settings.
So it is just kind of like a standard fantasy world. One of the big things is I do use only the Norse pantheon. Um, as of right now, there are no other gods. It is just the Norse pantheon, and the Norse pantheon is basically taken as fact.
Okay.
Um, there are some people who are like the gods aren't as powerful as people say they are, but their existence is a fact of the world. And then the other thing is I do have like an empire and like a rebel group, but the empire was in full control of the world for a rather large amount of time, and it is just now there has been a successful resistance against them.
So like you say that your pantheon is like a fact of the world. How is that any different than like traditionally? Because like a cleric is getting powers um, from their gods. Like no matter what, they're getting powers and like paladins and everything like that as well, or champions. Um, how's that any different than how they are portrayed in like do you portray them differently, the gods?
Well, I will occasionally, I haven't had it happen yet, but in my mind at least, the gods are like living in the world somewhere.
So it's more of like a Mount Olympus kind of situation where they're
Yeah.
physically manifested in the world constantly. That's interesting. Do you actually have them? You said you haven't like had it happen yet, but do you plan to have your players like physically interact with them at some point?
Yes. So I am having for Ragnarok to happen. And basically, when Ragnarok will happen, they will become less powerful to the point where the players could realistically fight them. And that's just going to be fun.
That sounds interesting. So how do that's really cool. I like chat saying instead of being in a different plane, like having them physically in the world. I like that too. I definitely like the Mount Olympus approach to it. I don't know the Norse specific example in comparison, but like how do you anticipate your players interacting with them? Because like usually when you have them on like in different settings or like they're in a different plane of existence, like how do you handle character death in that way then? Because like if the gods all occupy the material realm or like the realm of the players, where do things go when they die if they're not to other realms?
Well, they okay. So I don't have it fully fleshed out,
Oh,
but
okay.
basically there are three realms, um, and the gods have avatars in the world at all times. And
Okay.
basically, what I'm thinking for Ragnarok would be their like true selves in Asgard would be cut off, and so they only have their avatar in the real world
Interesting.
for that period of time. And then if they can live through Ragnarok, then their true self will then be like reconnected, and then that's how they will have lived through Ragnarok.
So I might actually have to steal that idea of like having the gods in the world. I don't know why I didn't think of that beforehand, but that's a really good idea. Because in my setting's called the Brinklands. How I've had it up into this point is like originally the only two gods to actually physically manifest are the moon god and the sun goddess. Um, that's because they're kind of mortal enemies, and so the sun goddess is the like basically physically manifesting as the sun in my world. The Brinkland setting that I'm writing, the planet is an eyeball planet or like a tidally locked planet, so one side is always facing the sun and one side's always dark. Um, but like having those two gods being the only ones like physically manifested in the world, I might have to do something now with the rest of them because I had the rest of them in just like whatever planes of existence. Like these are the only two that really care enough about this planet or this world. But that's a really good idea. I'm definitely gonna have to steal that from you.
That brings on something that we talked about in like the
Yeah,
pre-recording. Um, if I put it out on the internet, it's not stealing. Please take it. I'm
yes,
encouraging you to take it. Please take my ideas. That's why I put them out on the internet.
yeah. I feel the same way. People will message me on TikTok and be like, can I use this? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't have put it out there if I didn't want anybody to use it. I'm proud of it. That's why I want you to use it. Yeah. So yeah, the TikTok community, especially for Dungeons and Dragons, at least the side that we happen to be on, seems to be pretty accepting and like really good. If anyone's interested in getting in the D&D community, TikTok has definitely got a really cool niche place, friendly niche place.
Yeah, if you're listening and you want to make D&D content, do it on TikTok.
Yeah.
It's great. You will meet a lot of people really fast.
Yeah. Chad is saying, in my own homebrew setting, the gods are just hyper powerful physical beings that were spawned by the intersection of ley lines. Clerics get their power by channeling them via the ley line. That's cool.
That's cool, yeah.
That's really cool. I've always been interested in like the concept of ley lines because there's a lot of like D&D lore traditionally about ley lines, but they never get brought up in like just regular everyday adventures for Dungeons and Dragons. I know in one Pathfinder campaign, Pathfinder first edition campaign, there was I believe an adventure path that dealt with ley lines constantly. They were like basically barriers or whatever that you had to break through. But I want to look more into them because they sound really cool. So how do you approach DMing? Like how do you approach your DMing perspective? Because we've talked before, and I have a very like DM centric view of how I DM things, but you have a very player centric view. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
So I have a very player-centric view because for the most part, I am self-taught how to play. I played 3 sessions of second edition, and then RDM left to go off to college. And so I then had to use YouTube and buying books to then learn how to DM for my friends if I wanted to keep playing. And there's a lot more guides on YouTube about how to play than how to DM. So I come at it from a very player centric perspective. And I shape the world around the players, which I just think like most DMs should do. at least like a bit. Um,
I
but
think.
because
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, okay, because of all the guides and stuff online about how to make players, that's why I make NPCs and like villains the way that I do, where it's a full backstory and stats and all of the things like that. Just because that is how I learned how to play D&D, and that's how I DM.
It's interesting. Chat's saying we're too polite. We keep interrupting each other and then saying, "Oh, sorry." One of us has got to be mean. But to go to like my perspective, um, why I was to you to those of you that are just listening, I was kind of like waving my hand, kind of like maybe, is because I don't center the world around my players like hardly at all. Like obviously the game is about them because they're sitting at the table, and so like that's what they're going to experience. But I do not center the world around my players at all. I have the kind of the it's kind of like an old fashioned mentality of like, oh, like first and second edition where like your character level one is a weed and you have to prove yourself to be a hero, and you're not like necessarily a hero or like a hero adventure like right off the bat. You actually like got to work through those levels. Like if you got a character to live past fifth level, then you gave them a name. You know what I mean? These backstories didn't matter. Nobody cared what your backstory was until you got to fifth level, and they'd be like, "Oh, you've been around for a while. Who are you?" You know. So that's the kind of games that I like to run, where it's kind of like a like there's other movers and shakers in the world. If the players decide not to deal with something in the world, there'll always be someone that'll take up the fight, and that's kind of how I run my games. So, and it's kind of like a DM centric. Like this is just the world, whereas yours is kind of completely juxtaposition to that. Is like the world is centered around your players, so it's interesting. Do you have any like I don't want to say like concerns, but any gripes with that kind of view? Because I have some with kind of like a DM down viewpoint. So why don't you go ahead and
So part of the reason why I have like such a player centric view is just because I was creating the worlds along with the players creating their characters, and I just think for the there are 5 players on my table and there's one DM. So to me, just making it player centric makes more sense from just a numbers perspective.
yeah, I can see that. Do you have any like? Does that kind of perspective have any? Have you run into any issues with that kind of perspective?
I have not, but I've also only DM'd for really one group. So that could just be my players.
That is true. It's always good. Like it's always nice when you can get that like one group that just perfectly aligns with your style and like your role play. Like yeah, I've had a couple of those groups. Dredge Mage was a part of one of them, but yeah, and time availability is a big one for everyone as well. But for me, like one of the issues that I found with kind of like a DM down perspective is I have a tendency to kind of I don't want to say overlook backstories, but it's I definitely like it's kind of bitten me in the butt a couple times where I've taken a player's backstory and I've weaved it into something bigger, into like a bigger plot point, and I've had it like I've spent a lot of time doing that because like if I want the players to be involved in the game, like I want them to be weaved into my larger world and stuff. Um, I'll get back to that Dredge Mage, but anyway, so I like to like weave their backstories into a bigger story, and when I do that, I find that I can sometimes accidentally override what the player wanted for their character, and it's kind of something that I constantly have to work on and kind of like always keep an eye on, because I do, like I've said before, I do tend to fall into that my precious setting syndrome. Never so much like the DMPC issue, but definitely the my precious setting, and having to constantly keep an eye on that is like one of the issues that I have with a very much DM centric view. I've been DMing for so long, and I've been a forever DM for so long, that seeing things from the perspective of a player is kind of difficult for me sometimes. Have you had any experiences like that with your group so far?
Not really. But that's like over the summer, I would have calls with people about their character backstory, and I would help develop their character backstory with them because I wanted them to have like kind of like rich backstories. So I would help them along the process, and then I would weave that into the world building that I was doing at the time to have them seem very nicely together. Yeah.
Do you do you have any like have you had any issues, cuz I know you're kind of fairly new to DM because this is your first, like, I'd say probably major group, right? Like your first consistent group, you've said before.
Yeah.
Have you run any into any like specific issues that like, because we talk about like the D&D TikTok community, have there been any issues that you've like used to as an opportunity to like reach out and ask for help?
What do you mean?
Like, for instance, if I had a consistent group right now, which hopefully you will be a part of in the future, um, like if I run into an issue, I'd definitely like I would definitely ask other dungeon masters about something specific. Have you ever felt the need as a new dungeon master with this group to ask for help from other dungeon masters?
Not that I can remember, but my brother is a DM.
Okay.
So, and he's been DMing for basically about as long as I have. Um, but I don't know if I'm just lucky, but I have not really run into any problems with like rulings or anything.
What do you, because what I do at the table is I kind of utilize rule zero, and I'll be like, look, I've, you know, looked over the game, and this is the kind of style of game I have, because I always talk to my players beforehand and stuff, and this is like the kind of style of game that I want to play. And so if anything kind of conflicts with that, as a dungeon master, you reserve the right to rule zero, which is kind of like nix it and say, we're not going to do it that way. Have you ever had to do that as well? Not yet.
Again, not remember. Yeah.
Not yet. Oh, okay.
There have been times. There have been times where I've been role playing an NPC and I've said something, and then within like a couple of seconds realized, oh, that NPC wouldn't actually know that. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. But for the most part, I catch those pretty quickly.
I've had all too many issues with that as well. I'll be so excited to be like, all right, yeah, this is the information that they need, that I'll just let it slip, and they'll be like, oh, were we supposed to know that? It was like, no, no, can you forget? Can you forget I said that? Or like another one of the issues that I've run into is, for me personally, I will my players constantly have this need whenever I come up with an NPC name to just completely ignore the NPC name. And so I have this issue where I will just, like, I don't have a very good imagination when it comes to names. I am terrible with names. Like, unless I have a name written in front of me, I can't remember. It's in one ear, out the other. So I'm terrible with names. And so I'll always make up like these really lame like NPC names, and then my players will make fun of fun of it because it's too normal. And so I don't know. That's just one of the things I run into.
So I have had problems with players. I'll make a name that will be similar to a word, and then they would just call them that word. So like I have a NPC whose name is Alican, and so they started calling him Pelican.
Yeah, I can see that. I have that same issue.
They do, and I find that super annoying.
It really,
But
it really is. It's kind of like it falls in the line, I believe, in my personal opinion, it falls in the line of like no selling. Do you know what that is?
No.
So no selling is like, for example, you have the big bad evil guy. Like the players have been like working up to it, and they get all the way up to the very end, and you've built up this character to be super cool and super badass, and then your players no sell it, and they're like, I don't care. This is super easy. And then it's like they don't play into the role play. They don't, I don't want to say like act scared, because different characters will act a different way, but no selling is kind of when they just kind of metagame disregard the brevity of a situation. And
I
so yeah, it's one of my biggest pet peeves too, because like you put so much effort and time into these different NPCs, and they're like, yeah, we don't care.
Yeah.
Do you have any other specific, like very specific pet peeves like that too? We just rag on
So
players.
I'm probably gonna get in trouble with this, but my girlfriend, the way that she names her characters, she names them after kitchen appliances, and it annoys the crap out of me. Like she had a character. So the characters that I know of are Oven, which is the character she plays in my campaign, Tongs, Egg Beater, Food Processor, I think Juicer was one. And it's like they're not nicknames, because that I would be fine with. These are like her given names at birth, and it annoys the crap out of me.
And you can't complain, because then it'll be like, a toaster doesn't exist in this world. I can use it.
Ovens do exist though. Like not like a modern oven, but like
Yeah. Do they like even try to um try to like hide it, like OVE, and then like N at the EN for a different, so it's like middle name or first name Ove and then middle name N. Nothing like that. It's just straight up oven.
it's just oven. Her full name is Oven Rack. Um, she is from a town that she made up called Kitchen. And she has a pet lizard named Mitt, so it's Oven's Mitt.
I can see how that can get a little irritating. Just not enough to like really complain about it like outwardly, but just like behind that screen you're like, I hate that character. I want to kill that character so bad.
Because our group is Zakara, Esmeralda, Sorsha, Aesop, and Oven.
That's even worse. Like if it was just like a full party of just ridiculous names, I could get behind that. It's like all or nothing. Another one of my biggest pet peeves is I've talked about it on my TikTok before. Is when players will roll for like a skill or something before I even ask for something. I was like, I wasn't even gonna make you roll. Your role play was doing great, and then you roll, and then you failed. So now we gotta role play that. Like, so I try to have my players be like, look, if you're doing good at role play, I'm not gonna make you roll. But if you just roll randomly, like you're just wasting your rolls. Because I've had players definitely like they'll be like, I'll be describing a scene, and then it'll be like, I roll to attack. I was like, okay, make your roll now. They're like, I just made it. Like, yeah, but I didn't ask for it. Like, I don't know. If is that like a weird pet peeve thing? Is that just me?
I've had that happen. I've had that happens a lot less with this group, just because most of them are new players and most of them don't know the system enough to even do that in advance. Like I have to remind them what like a skill check is. Uh, but the one experienced player, well, the couple experienced players I have, they do get that. But in my old group, where we would play like one shots and stuff, that was a problem that kept happening. Was they would roll before I asked for anything, and if it was bad, they wouldn't use it. But if it
Yeah,
was good, they'd use it.
yeah, that's where I'd be like, I like roles don't matter unless I ask for them, because you don't get to just like rules law your way out of this. Like you get to use them when they're good, but not use them when they're bad. No, especially if I don't see them being rolled. Like I've had, so I used to when I was younger, I used to DM games for Pathfinder Society and Adventures League, and that's basically running games for a whole bunch of randos. And you get some pretty interesting characters whenever you run games for the public. And like that was one of my biggest pet peeves, where like shady people that were kind of playing the game to like to win essentially. Like I just don't understand it. I If you really enjoy roleplay, if you're listening to this and you really enjoy roleplay, do not play Adventures League and do not play Pathfinder Society. You will not have a fun time. It is too mechanics heavy. They ban everything that's fun, and you got to deal with weird people that you have no idea. Like you have no idea when you're sitting down what these people are going to be like whenever you sit down, unless you get like a consistent Adventurers Guild or Pathfinder Society group. But yeah, chat saying they played League back in 4E. Interesting. I wonder how that went. Saying it wasn't that bad in 4E is probably because of how the game was structured. I don't know if you haven't played 4E, have you, Meg?
No.
People always like to call it like an MMO on paper. And to a certain degree, I can kind of understand that because a lot of the mechanics are very codified in the game. They're less nebulous, I would say. Um, so, for instance, whenever you started combat, you had like different powers or different abilities, and you have they'd have different times you could use them. So, one would be like once per encounter. So, no matter how many encounters you have, you can use that ability once per any encounter. And then you'd have abilities that would be like one time per day, and then you'd have at will powers, and then you'd have any ones that were like a certain amount of times per day. And so it was like really kind of gamified, I guess you could say. And so people's criticisms were you can't really role play as much, but it would lend itself to a really streamlined Adventures League game, I suppose. But anyway, we're getting off topic. So we kind of talked about your homebrew setting. So let's go into like more detail about how you actually started building your setting, because you said it's not finished. So you're in the middle of building your setting. What are you currently working on?
So basically, there are like four main continents, um, and the one the players are on is not one that's actively taking part in like the civil war going on. So recently, there has been a lot less of the actual like empire type people in that area because they have been pulled out to go fight in the war. This had some interesting effects, like a lot more crime and a lot more piracy. But that's where the players currently are. And then I'm currently working on fleshing out the main place of the empire, like the main place that they are right now.
Okay. So like when you're building your setting, do you I believe you said before, because we had this like a little bit of conversation before, you said that you are starting with the gods first, if I recall. You
Yes.
started with the pantheon first, and you're kind of building top down. At what point are you, like how close to the bottom are you, like how close to like the nitty gritty details do you have, like cultural customs, or um like how many of that stuff do you have? Because I feel like that's like bottom of the totem pole kind of stuff.
So honestly, I've not made that stuff for anywhere. Just because that's probably I don't know how to make that, so I just kind of put that off, and we've just started playing, and hopefully I'll add it in eventually. But at least as of right now, I have not added that at all. Um, but right now in like the main empire place, I'm currently building cities and things.
So I actually start from the bottom. I start with weird cultural stuff, or for instance, I was running a Starfinder game, and I for all of the Vesk, like the Vesk people, I made it to where um, like the cultural thing was they had family lines, like family trees and stuff, and so like it was like I start with that kind of stuff. I don't start with the pantheon or anything like that. I start with like the really cool cultural stuff. So like what I did for the Vesk was I had them their last names were kind of like their first names. It was so their family name always came first because that was the most important like designation for the Vesk as a people because they're considered like a warrior race, and so um, there's a whole bunch of different issues when it comes to that. But like the Vesk people were definitely yes, you can pop in, Mr. President. Um, but yeah, the Vesk people were very militaristic, and so when it came to their family lines, the different family lines would differentiate their job positions in the society. And so like that's the kind of stuff I start with. Like I start with, how does your world deal with trash? Like that's a really important question that nobody asks, but it's really important. Like like how does trash get taken care of in your world? You
I
don't
have no idea. I've never thought of that.
I know. That's the stuff I love to start with. You got anything off the top of your head?
I mean, it's going to be magic in some way. I just don't know
So you,
quite how.
you could go the Baldur's Gate direction where you just have a whole bunch of gelatinous cubes that go around in the bottom of the sewer system. That's why the sewer system is so dangerous in Baldur's Gate. It's because there's a whole bunch of gelatinous cubes that just kind of sludge through and pick up all the organic matter and then leave just like water behind. So that's why like you got like rat swarms is because they're running away from the gelatinous cubes. So you could do it that way. One way that I think Matt Colville was it Matt Colville? Might be from WebDM. It's either Matt Colville or WebDM. They talk about how they have fairies, like the Fae, like these specific, they're called trash fairies, and you leave out your trash and then you leave like a treat or like sweets for the fairies at night, and then they take your trash. Nobody knows where it goes, nobody sees the fairies. They just, your trash disappears, and like if you don't leave any sweets or anything out for the fairies and you leave the trash out, they'll just smear the trash all over your residence. And so I like that idea too. Like I've used that in like more of a like probably like a forest environment or like a forest culture or something like that. I'd probably use that, and more of like a city culture would probably use that. But like that, those are the questions you need to be asking. Uh, like how is farming handled in your world? Like how is the distribution of farming goods handled?
What do you mean exactly?
All right, so for example, in my world, there is every 10 years there is a solar eclipse that allows for the monsters from the dark side of the planet, because we talked about like my planet being a eyeball planet. So whenever the solar eclipse happens, it's like a month where the sun's blocked out because the moon god is preventing the sun goddess from doing whatever. So all the monsters from the dark side of the planet will migrate to the light side of the planet, and so all of the farmers that are out there outside of the Great Citadel, all of them have to migrate back to the Great Citadel and bring the food with them. And so there's basically kind of like it's called a farmers guild, and what they do is they chat saying, "What is the economic structure of your world?" The real questions of the homebrew setting. Yeah. Um, but anyway, so like all the farmers guilds in my world have to coordinate and work with each other, and so they work with druids, specifically druids, because they can control weather, they can toil the soul, or sorry, till the soil, and all that kind of stuff a lot quicker than a regular farmer would. And so every like all the druids work in conjunction with city people to feed everyone in there, and then that way they can kind of like they don't have to worry about actually keeping farmlands. They could just leave it to the druids and the farming guilds, and then whenever the 10-year cycle comes by, they can migrate it all back through just bring it on carts or whatever. So like how is the distribution of food handled in your world?
So, for the most part, unless if you're like a really big city, your city is kind of self-dependent on food. Um, but there are druids that work for the Empire where their job is to go around and cast, I think it's plant growth,
Hmm.
which if you cast it for 8 hours, like it makes like the land like extra fertile for like
Yeah.
a year. And that's basically what those druids do is they just go around to different cities, they cast it and help give everyone food.
Do you have a central crime system for your world? Like we have the judicial system in the United States. Does your world have something similar?
No, that is the city decides for itself.
So it's kind of like a city state situation.
Unless if it is something extremely powerful, like if there is for whatever reason like a like mad wizard
Okay.
who's has like higher level spells, then they'll go get the Empire and they'll be like, "Yo, we need help," and then they will send people out to go and get them.
Chat saying one of my favorite DM activities is to look at the spell list and try and find spells that will have economic impacts like create water. Yeah, that's literally what I do. That's how I start my bottom up approach to DMing. I was like, all right, how am I gonna like how am I gonna handle crime in my world? And so, for instance, my world, since there is one major central location, the Great Citadel, there are civilizations that are outside the walls of the Great Citadel, and further out from that, you have what's called the Twilight Lands. It's where the light and dark side kind of meet. It's very dangerous there because the monsters can kind of come over into the Twilight Lands for a little bit without being harmed too much, and they'll basically grab people and eat them and leave. Um, so anyway, crime outside the Great Citadel is very, it's like frontier law. And so what happens is like anytime they deal with a situation that they can't come to a conclusion on their own, they petition. Like there's little cities and little towns outside the Great Citadel, and what they'll do is they'll petition for the lawbringers to come out, and basically it's an organization that goes out into wherever, and then they are judge, jury, and executioner. So if you bring it to a lawbringer and you have a petty squabble, like let's say someone destroyed your fruit stand and you want them to pay for it, if you petition for a lawbringer, they're going to come out, listen to both sides of the story, they're going to come to a conclusion, they use some magical means and stuff like that, and then whoever is found to be in the at fault is then killed. Like just like that. And so a lot of people in the frontier, like outside of the Great Citadel, law is just like you don't necessarily take it into your own hands, but you come to an amicable solution before petitioning for the lawbringer. Like you only call in the law unless you really need to. So it's usually like corruption charges where you can't get like someone from the town will be like, oh, someone in our location is corrupt. Like in our town is corrupt. We need someone to figure it out, and so they'll petition a lawbringer out. And if it's found out to be like a false accusation or whatever, then they're gone too. Like that's how crime, because they don't have the time to handle everything outside the Great Citadel, and so that's kind of how law is um, handled in my world. You don't have any kind of central law system yet, maybe.
Not as of um so I do have basically I have kind of in my head there is like a three campaign structure in this world. And basically this is the most primitive. And then the next one, as of right now, it appears that they're going to be trying to get rid of the Norse gods. And through magical means, Odin kind of cut off the world from all of the other planes. So if Odin dies during Ragnarok, that will be broken. And then a whole lot of stuff's going to happen when all of those planes come back into existence. Well, when all those planes like reconnect with this world. And that will then launch into more of like a Eberron type setting where it's like
Interesting.
it's still very much magic, but there's starting to be technology.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hope is, depending on what happens there, because there's a whole lot of things that could happen there, it will then move into a more like Starfinder type of game where it will be like literally thousands of years between each campaign. So the
Um,
effects of the players in the previous one can definitely be felt going forward.
space fantasy, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I can understand your apprehension to creating like a bottom up approach to your world because you're like, I'm gonna scrap it and have to make a like a more advanced version of it. So cultures are gonna change. So I can understand that approach, but I use the same consistent settings. So um, I love spending the time of figuring out all the stupid intricacies. Like I figured out where trash is going to be handled. Uh, like I haven't even really figured out the entire pantheon yet. I just have two gods, maybe three so far. Um, and then that's it. I'm more interested in what the players are actually going to interact with, other than gods, because I know God. Yeah, players will have to interact with gods. But
Yeah, that is part of the reason why I focus on the gods first. Is just because like I have kind of like four favorite classes, and it is druid, sorcerer, and warlock. Um, and because I really like clerics, I think about gods very much in that perspective. Because knowing what the gods are is very important to the players if they want to play a cleric or kind of a paladin. So I just like part of the reason why I do gods first is so then that information will be available to them when they're making their character.
so that's interesting. Do you like how do you differentiate? Because you're talking about your different gods and the like. I know they're based on the Norse pantheon. Like, how do you differentiate the different types of magic? Like, do you differentiate between like arcane magic, nature magic with like druids or whatever, and celestial magic with clerics, or is it kind of just a nebulous? This is just magic kind of stuff.
It's more along the lines of it's just magic. And it's more there are borders between what different approaches can do, and that's decided by class. So like there is no real difference between divine magic and arcane magic in terms of like appearance, but in terms of what you can do with it, there is a difference.
Okay.
I don't know if that made sense.
No, it definitely does. Chat saying, interesting question. Can a world with an actual pantheon have multiple religions, or does everyone end up following the same religion because, the gods are real?
So in my world, it is basically either you don't really believe in like everyone knows the gods exist, and it's whether you worship them or not. Um, there are people who believe that other gods exist. As of right now, they are wrong. Um, but basically, it's kind of I don't think the gods are really the gods. I think they're just really powerful people who have convinced people that they're gods, and they're people who believe they're actually gods and like worship them like gods.
So your gods are just player characters from a previous campaign.
That may be that may happen if depending on what happens, depending on how Ragnarok goes, there is definitely a possibility of them becoming gods.
So have you ever played the Elder Scrolls, like any Elder Scrolls game?
I have, yeah. I have played only Skyrim.
Okay. I just need to remember. Okay, so they kind of deal with do you know like the concept of Lorcan?
No.
The one of the gods that like was died. It created Mundus, the planet that Skyrim is set in, or like the Elder Scrolls is set in. Um, Basically, like whenever that god died and sacrificed itself to create Mundus, they like left a hole in the pantheon, and then that's how Talos was able to become a god. Like it was regular mortal and then rose to be a god. So is that kind of how you have it in your pantheon, where like do the gods like have a, let me see if I can word this. Are there basically slots that your gods have to fill, and then anyone who mantles those positions gains those powers. So how I'm trying to describe it is like, let's say there is a spot for a god of a travel, like a god of travel, and there's does there always have to be a spot for the god of the god of travel, or is it like you become a god, you decide to be the god of travel, and so there's a god of travel? So, are you kind of getting what I'm?
It will be so I have not really thought about this because they are not that close to being to that point yet. But most likely it would be there are slots for the gods, and if there is no one in that slot, then people could attempt to join that slot. And I do not know exactly how that will work mechanically yet. But I also know there new slots can be created.
New
I
slots
think
can be created. Would it
because like
have
right
to would it have to divide like a more powerful quote unquote god slot, or so like instead of like a god of travel and a god of like, let's say there's a god of protection and travel, could that then be split into a god of protection and then a god of travel?
definitely that
Okay.
could definitely happen. But I was thinking more like there is no god of technology, but as technology advances, a god of technology slot could be created.
So that's kind of how Starfinder, their pantheon works a little bit. There weren't like Triune was a, it's like multiple gods, it's like three gods in one, thus the Triune, but they became a god because there was belief around technology, and so they like just took up that power. So that's an interesting way to think about it as well.
What I have come to realize is the more I learn about RPGs, the more I realize I apparently just want to play Starfinder. I have gotten I've gotten recommended looking at fourth edition, 3.5, Pathfinder, and Starfinder multiple times on many different TikToks.
Yeah, Starfinder is honestly hands down one of my favorite systems. So if you ever want to, um,
What is your
what is my favorite? What?
what is your favorite system?
Uh, to to be like quite honest, chat's asking me to run a virtual Starfinder game. I just might. Um, but I'd say probably my most favorite system is probably Pathfinder First Edition. Like realistically, Pathfinder First Edition. It got rid of a lot of the leftover bad stuff from third edition and 3.5, and then like repackaged it into something better, I feel. And then Pathfinder First Edition has the same kind of problem that third edition had with like bloat and stuff. But the plus side of that is if you could think of a character concept that you would want to create, Pathfinder First Edition, you can make it. Like absolutely. There's between the different archetypes, multi-classing, the different types of classes that they came out. Like a lot of classes had some like overlap and stuff, but that just allowed you to create super niche specific characters. You were like, yeah, I want to, for instance, one of my favorite weird wacky classes from Pathfinder First Edition is called the it's either the scroll, yeah, I think it's the scroll master. And what they do is they use like spell scrolls as sword and shield. So they literally walk around with a sword and shield out of spell scrolls, and depending on the level of the spell scroll, so like all the way up to level 9, determines the bonuses and abilities those things have. So the whole class is dependent on how expensive or how much money you can spend on scrolls, and that's just a stupid character idea that you can do in Pathfinder First Edition. And the examples are endless when it comes to Pathfinder. Do you want to play a round grape blood mage where like you're so bloated with blood that you can't walk anymore and you have to like float around? Well, you got that too. Like name any kind of thing. You can make a character for it. It's
Wow.
yeah. Let's see. They have prestige classes in Pathfinder First Edition as well. That's kind of left over from third edition. where there are classes that you can only take after you meet prerequisites for it. Um, like so, like let's say for instance you want to be a dragon disciple. It's kind of like a dragon sorcerer, a dragon bloodline sorcerer, but you have specific prerequisites that you have to meet before you can take the class, and then it kind of like accelerates your bloodline progression, and so you get a lot of your abilities quicker and you get more of them. So it's just cool stuff like that.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I could talk about Pathfinder for days, Pathfinder, Starfinder for days. Um, but yeah, I'll probably end up running a Starfinder game here soon.
I looked at the Pathfinder rules today after I finished an econ exam that I had, and earlier today, I think it was, oh wait, no, it was yesterday. One thing that I've noticed so I like sorcerers a lot. If you can't tell by the name, Meg Sorcerers. Um, I was looking at the 5e sorcerer, and in these subclasses, I realized there was kind of a hole that I felt like really should have been filled a while ago
What
with.
with what's the whole
So basically, a druid like sorcerer, and you're already smiling. People in the comments said Pathfinder has one.
more than one
And
actually?
really?
So yeah, you have like a aberrant. No,
Mm-hmm.
not aberration. Sorry. They have like a nature one, and then they have a fey one, and then they have like several different animal ones that are kind of druid like, and then they have specifically like a wood sorcerer, like a wood. No, I think that's a wizard actually. They have a wood school wizard, which is weird. They're like nature wizards as well. But yeah, like definitely have nature sorcerers and stuff already.
Yeah, because like they have a cleric like sorcerer and they have a warlock like sorcerer now, and there's just no druid like sorcerer. And so I'm currently like designing one.
It's probably going to be one of those things where like they're saving all the cool stuff so that they can release it later and charge more money for it. But
Yeah, that annoys me. But it's also like if you know the name of it, it's not that hard to find it somewhere online for free. But it is kind of annoying
yeah.
that they do things like that.
Um so I guess kind of like going back to the like the world building stuff. Do you do a lot of improv when it comes to world building, or is your world building more like hard coded? Like do you sit down and come up with world lore for your game? Or do you do a lot of in the moment, I didn't have a solution for that, so we're going to make one up now, and now that's etched into lore?
I have done improv, but most of the time I don't. Most of the time I also don't really sit down either. Most of the time I'll just be like watching something or doing something else and I'll think of something cool. And so I'll write it down and I will come back to it later and like try to write it down. Or really I'll just like remember that little thing because I wrote it down. And that is mainly how I do world building, which I think is kind of weird, but
Yeah, because I definitely do the the improv style. That's where I come up with like I mean, honestly, most of the stuff that I come up with, why I start from the bottom up is because I just start with a central location and I'm like, all right, where do you guys want to go kind of thing. And then a situation will come up where they'll be like, well, where'd all the trash go? Like, I don't know. It's this is how trash is handled now. Like, it's kind of that's how I homebrew stuff, honestly. So the creation of my worlds and everything is kind of slow going.
yeah, I don't have players that ask questions like that.
Well, you don't have players like me then. So sorcerer, sorry, sorcerer is your favorite class. Do you have a specific kind of style of sorcerer in mind that you like playing?
So I like battlefield control a lot. Um, Especially like I like Sorcerer before Aberrant Mind came out,
Hmm.
but Aberrant Mind has just shot Sorcerer to like new heights in fifth edition because of being able to. So there's a cantrip called Mind Sliver where it forces a creature to make an intelligence saving throw, and if they fail, they take a d6 of damage, which isn't much, but they take a minus d4 penalty to the next saving throw they have to make. So you quicken spell. So you do that with your action, and then you use your bone, and then you use quicken spell, which is a meta magic option, to do some sort of spell with a saving throw. So like you could do like a hypnotic pattern or something, and then they would have a minus d4 penalty if they fail the intelligence save, with which most creatures will. And it is a strategy that I really love about it, and also Ever in Mind I just think has a lot of cool flavor to it because it's like a telepath type subclass. I like Ever in Mind Sorcerer a lot.
Do you have like a favorite like kind of sorcerer from like a specific edition, or is fifth edition is your like main one, right?
Fifth edition is pretty much the only one I've played. I played 3 sessions of second edition in which I played a druid. Um,
Arguably the most powerful class in that edition, honestly.
yeah, but we played 3 sessions, so we didn't get up to like very powerful.
Yeah.
But I did get a pet panther. I love that. His name was Charles, and he hit more consistently than any other player in our party, and he had higher intelligence than our rogue.
It's usually how it went with second edition druids. And then you get the ability where you can in that edition, I think it's called awaken, where you can like touch a creature and then just give it intelligence. And then you have, the druid walking around with animal companions that are smarter than the fighter.
Yeah, we didn't get up to that level, but we did a couple times get to speak to Charles telepathically, and whenever we would talk to him, he had a British accent. Um, and so it was just like he was a very valued member of our party, and we all loved him. He was the best.
It's kind of like that classic character, like Mr. Barrington. The druid's bear that just follows the party around. He's got a little top hat, monocle. But yeah,
That is the thing that I don't like about fifth edition is that druids don't get animal companions.
yeah.
I would be I would trade some of their magic power to get that animal companion because I love the flavor of a druid with an animal companion, and it just feels
Like
the druid doesn't feed without it.
I understand why I understand why they removed the ability for the druid to have like all of that, because like when you start stacking up what they can do spell casting all the way up to ninth level traditionally.
Mhm.
So traditionally they can go up to like ninth level spell casting. They have an animal companion, then they can shape change themselves, and then like in some editions and some abilities you can actually like shape change and cast spells at the same time. And so like, yeah, I think Pathfinder actually has a feat that you can take. It's called like feral speech or something like that, where you can like full on cast spells while in whatever druid animal form you're in. And that's crazy powerful. Like when you're a hawk up in the air slinging spells down, like your game that's difficult to handle in any game, honestly.
Oh yeah,
So, and then on top of that, them having an animal companion that they can flank with, like I'm a bear, they're a bear, we're flanking. Like it's ridiculous the kind of stuff that they can do. So I understand and I appreciate it, like from the perspective of a dungeon master, because like you get one really good, like you can get like a regular average run of the mill like druid or wizard player, and your game will be kind of difficult. Like they'll throw some wrenches in your things occasionally, but you get a really good druid player or like a really good divination wizard, and you're screwed. There's nothing you can do, especially if you have both in the same party. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand like from a balancing perspective that druid shouldn't get pets, but at the same time, at level 5, I believe they can use. Oh wait, no, it's level 7. They can use conjure woodland beings to summon pixies that can then polymorph the entire party. And it's like, why can't I have a pet panther? If I can turn the entire party into T Rexes at will, why can't I have a pet panther? Like,
Yeah. I don't know.
and also like if
Game
the ranger
balance.
was better, I would have a little bit less of a problem with it. But it's
Rain
more what?
Ranger was so good in previous editions. I was really upset because like that traditional like concept of the ranger, like the ranger isn't like anything that's coherent from like history or anything. So the only thing about the ranger that's like in pop culture is Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. Like that's the only realistic, like that's the only reference people have for like the concept of a ranger, and so flavorful and evocative, and they got rid of it all in 5th edition. I was so disappointed.
Yeah, they've done bits of things to try to make the ranger better, but I do think part of the core problem is 5th edition has kind of gone away from exploration. And when you have a class that's supposed to be like the best at exploration, and then your game shies away from exploration, they're gonna feel really underwhelming.
Yeah, I've done a lot in my games to actually put, I mean, you'll know this if you ended up playing in my Pathfinder game, but I put a lot of effort into making adventuring, like, because there's usually the three pillars of play. You got combat, you got social, and then you got exploration. I like to say that there's four, and travel is supposed to be the fourth, but nobody likes travel. Nobody likes overland travel. They're usually trying to like to skip it. They're like, all right, you were at this location, now you're at this location. I go the opposite direction. I'm like, all right, this is the trek across the land. Like, you want a big epic? Well, that big epic is, in between that time, there's a lot of traveling. And so, like, that careful balance between, it's going to be a little boring, like, you need stuff to do. It's a careful balance for any game to do, but I do my best to do that because of Rangers. Because if you don't have that travel, if you don't have that in between time, you have an entire class that's useless.
Mm-hmm. But even in 5th edition, even their combat abilities aren't great. Like their like favored foe, I think is the name. It's like if you're fighting that foe, then the range is great, and if you're not, they get nothing from that ability at all.
They had the issue in Pathfinder First Edition and previous editions as well. Pathfinder then changed it. They came out with a class called the Slayer, which is kind of like a Ranger Rogue hybrid, because they had hybrid classes in that system too, and they kind of solved it. And so they made it to where all you had to do was just study. Like, you had to spend, I think it was a standard action in that edition, so it'd just be like an action in 5th edition. You'd have to spend a round basically studying your target, and then you'd get your favorite enemy bonus to matter what it was, and then you get additional bonuses if it was like your specific type of enemy that you're like hunting. So like instead of a +4, it'd be a +8 against that one enemy type.
I love that.
Yeah. So maybe doing that, homebrewing that for your game, just make it to where they just have to spend an action studying the enemy, and boom, there you go. Ranger's a little bit better.
Yeah, I also think that like I think it's kind of a similar like I think honestly one of the best ways to play a ranger is to multi-class and just get a little bit of ranger, which makes me a little sad, just because the ranger is such a cool concept,
Yeah,
but just so poor execution.
yeah. I mean, I wish there was like more the designers could do. I mean, there is more that they could do, but like I wish they got the resources to like go back and like maybe re-release the Ranger. Like definitely feel like they could come out with like a small short PDF like here's an actual Ranger, and then just be like there you go, it's on Unearthed Arcana, boom, fix it.
They yeah, with the revised Ranger, and
Oh, I didn't know that
it's
came out.
it still wasn't great.
Oh,
It
it
was a
wasn't.
bit better. It was a bit better, but it's still, at least to me, it did not live up to what a Ranger could and should be.
What
And
did they not do that you would appreciate them doing more?
I don't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at the document just because I don't even really look at Ranger. And so I don't really remember what all they did. They have released some stuff in Tasha's, like alternate abilities that you could take, and some of those have definitely made it better. But I still feel like Ranger is lacking.
Chat's saying that they went from lame to more optimized lame.
At least, like to me, the best way to play a Ranger right now is take 2 levels of Druid and then play a fighter with who uses a bow. Like to me, like in fifth edition, that's the best way to play a Ranger.
So probably what I would do to fix the fifth edition Ranger, and I don't know, like I don't look at any of the classes for fifth edition. I don't really like. I'm not a player for fifth edition, first of all, and like the games I have run, I usually change too much anyway. But so I don't look at the classes very much. But anyway, well, like one of the things that I would probably do or like bring back from previous editions to fix, at least what I remember from the fifth edition Ranger, is I'd probably put more emphasis on their sensory abilities. Like I know I have, what is it called, primeval awareness or something like that, right? Where they can kind of
So
like they like listen to the ground, they can hear anything. But the problem with that is like they can't discern what creature it is. They can only discern like if it's a type of creature in a certain area. But I would go further than that, and I would make it more of like, so I would give bonuses to that. I'd say they'd be able to figure out the type of creature it is, like down to its second degree type. Like, so if it's humanoid, I would say like they could like figure out it's humanoid or orc, humanoid, humanoid. I'd let them discern that, and then I would probably have like a favorite enemy that they would pick a primary type instead of a secondary type. So just humanoids. Like you're really efficient at killing humanoids specifically. So you're like an assassin ranger instead of having to pick a specific subcategory. Like it's kind of weird. Just you only kill orcs or you only kill gnomes or it's kind of weird to me. Anatomy is not that much different in any regard. So I would just say
yeah,
like type, like quadrupeds, bipeds, like humanoids, and then like aberrations would be a different kind, or like beast would be a different kind. So if you're a ranger that hunts beasts often, just every beast or a magical beast, maybe even. And then chat's saying rangers need a new concept. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. And then another thing I'd probably do is have them have different fighting styles and give them kind of like fighter fighting styles where they can pick a weapon. I don't want to go so much into like them having favored terrain because then that really kind of blocks you off. I would say like you are just better outside than you are inside. Like you're not good in dungeons. Like anywhere in nature, you're a ranger, anywhere in nature, you should be better at. Just kind of like a druid. A druid isn't kind of locked into this. I'm only good in forests. I'm only good in swamps. I'm only good in the plains. So neither should a ranger. You know what I mean?
yeah. To me, like if a Ranger, like if they were going to, I like the concept of like a Ranger having like a favorite terrain, but it should still be like you have an increase to all terrain no matter what, and then like you have like an even higher bonus to that one terrain. So like you still get a bonus to everything because that makes a lot of sense because the differences aren't, at least to me, big enough where the terrain would really matter, but you would know the small details in that one terrain to like make that, even compared to your tracking skills normally, make a difference.
Yeah, I'd probably also remove any amount of spell casting they may have, because I know in previous editions they had minor amounts of spell casting. I would just give them specific kind of flavorful class abilities instead. Instead of having like specific spells that they have to take and having spell slots or whatever, I'd rather just go a different way and just like, no, these are just class abilities that you get and you can use them whenever you want. That's just this is your thing, because like when you give them spell casting and then an animal companion, but you give them like in previous editions they did like delayed spell casting, so they only got like 6 levels of spells after level 4. So you start your spell casting at level 4 and then you can only go up a certain amount of spell level. It's weird, ridiculous. Remove spell casting, just give them class abilities that are flavorful, that actually kind of match what you're wanting to do. So if you want like a nature ranger, you can have them pick different like archetypes that are more focused towards like different terrains and different I don't know what you want to call them, different favorite enemies or something like that. Or you could go more of like a combat ranger, kind of like how Aragorn is, and you just hunt things. You just hunt humanoids. You are like a ranger that's a scout. Like you go more like of a scout kind of play style, and give them better sensory abilities, because they don't have any sensory abilities at all. Like they got the primeval awareness, and then like that's it in base game. I'd give them more. Like they should be pretty close to a divination wizard in their abilities to discern what's out there, at least if they're in nature. Like for instance, have them have like monster lore checks that they could make that are separate than like knowledge nature, like where they could just see a scratch like on a tree and be like, I know exactly what is here, like what is in the area. I know that, I can touch these tracks. You can tell that like how fresh they are, how far away these things are. Like give them way more sensory abilities is what I would do.
That would be cool. Right now in 5th edition, they have the same casting abilities as like a paladin.
Yeah, that's usually how it is. So they have the same thing in Pathfinder as well, or third edition and fourth edition, I believe, as well. And weird spellcasting levels for whatever reason. Doesn't make sense. But um, I'm running out of topics, to be honest. Do you have anything you want to talk about?
So when you make characters, do you do like a full backstory for them, or do you make them the same way that you make NPCs?
I make them the same way I do NPCs. Like I said, I'm kind of like a traditional player where like I don't really care what their backstory is until I know that they're going to survive a little while. And so I'll come up with like a basic idea of like I know why they're adventuring. Like I know what brought them to the table. Like up until the like I sit down at the table, I'll be like, all right, this is why they're at the table. This is why they took or going on the adventure in the first place. But the backstory I'm largely unconcerned with until I've kind of settled into the character. You know what I mean? Um, I just I Chat's saying basically you don't default to player characters. Uh, Player characters are special. I don't understand that question, but anyway, yeah. So I just don't really care, honestly. I I've played in a lot of games where they're more of like meat grinders than anything, less player focused, less character focused, and they're definitely more like just adventure focused. Like you are part of an adventuring guild. I've played in more games. That's the kind of game I like running. That's the kind of game I like playing. I like the everything to come out at the table instead of before the table, because as a dungeon master, one of the things that I constantly run into with players is they will um, like whenever I ask them to come up with a backstory, they'll come up with this big grand backstory, of all the feats that their character has done. They've, saved a town, they're the town local hero, and they've done this, they've done that, and like that's cool. But as a dungeon master, I'll be like, well, can't we do that at the table? Like, that's the whole point. If you playing, if you've done all your adventuring beforehand and you're a local hero, then why are you doing this? So I do it that way. You you do it differently, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, like um, with your characters, how do you come up with their names? Actually, I'm interested in how other people come up with their character names because I have an issue with it. How do you do it?
So I use so sometimes I use name generators, like fancy name generator. It's relatively good. I found a couple of good names from there, but most of the time I will think of like a theme, and I will Google X theme baby names. So like space baby names, and there are lists of hundreds of baby names, and they are alphabetized. They are like by like male, female, unisex, and that is how I generally come up with names. Is just because they have a lot of names that are they sound like names, but they're also unique enough that you probably don't know someone with that name.
Okay,
And I've just found baby names, like baby name websites, really useful in coming up with names.
I've never thought about doing it that way. I do it the So I had a favorite author growing up. He came up with the Aragon series. Are you familiar?
I haven't read it, but I do know of Aragon.
So like I make names in the same way that Aragon, like the author Christopher Paolini, like he comes up with names. He'll just take a um, very familiar like name for something, and then just change one letter of it. And so Aragon is just dragon spelt with an E in front. And so I do that kind of stuff. I'll just be like, all right, I don't know, like mage, or I'm gonna be a mage, so my character's name is Paige, or I just not creative with names, or I'll have like a very very basic name like Ben, or I think like one of the more creative ones I've come up with is I really like the like I have a necromancer character that I like to play, um and like I really like the idea of like Magic the Gathering character Liliana Vess, right?
Yeah,
So I was like, all right, but I want to be a male necromancer. So what is the male name for Liliana? Well, it's Elias. So I'll just be like, all right, I'm Elias Vess. They just like, gender swap names or whatever from like familiar.
I've never thought about taking for Magic the Gathering because
Oh,
none
they
of my
got
players play, and they have a bunch of really good names.
definitely like Liliana Vess. You got like uh
Jace,
Jace the Mind Sculptor. You got was it Garuk? Um,
that sounds right. But yeah, there's a lot of names out there because
Sorin.
I don't play a lot of Magic, but I did play for a little bit, and so I do have a decent amount of cards. Yeah, that's a good idea going for Magic the Gathering
Yeah.
because they have the same vibe. Like they have like the same type of like fantasy names.
I mean, they're owned by the same company, so I would assume
Yeah,
so.
yeah, but just because it's owned by Wizards doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Oh, I
Because
did.
yeah, like I like some of the stuff that Wizard does, and I do eventually want to work for them, but they make some decisions where it's like, why? Like, I don't know if you saw the TikTok today where I talk about grungs.
Oh,
For people
yeah.
who don't know, grungs are adorable little frog people. They're based off of poison dart frogs, and they're slavers. Why? Who looked at a tiny frog person and was like, you know what this person needs? Slaves. Why? Why was that necessary? Like, you can have them be evil and not be slavers.
Yeah, and that's an issue with like I believe it's the Dwergar, the Drow. Like there's already
There's
enough.
so many different slavers. There's so many different slavers, and I don't get why. Like, That's not good world building, just having a bunch of people be slavers. You can have people be evil. And, like, first off, I'm very much a fan of villains who aren't necessarily evil, like evil, evil.
Like
Like,
justifiably
just,
evil, kind of like
yes.
the ends justify the means kind of character
Mm-hmm.
approach. Yeah, I love villains like that.
Yeah, and it's just like you can have more of that. Like in my campaign, the Grungs are little pirates, and they live in little tribes, and they're just on a boat, and they just get whatever they need by stealing from other ships or fishing from the ocean. And it fits with like the amphibious theme because it's like they live on land, but they're also like always by the water, and they don't have slaves because why?
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just kind of you're definitely right. It's lazy writing because they just
Like,
default to like, they're evil. What's the best way we can make them evil? Slavers.
yeah,
Yeah.
the one exception, like I don't think slavery really should be like that much of a thing, but to me the one exception is really aberrations because then it's not then it's mind control and it's like that's kind of different.
Oh, yeah, that actually brings up a good point. Enchantment in my world, like enchantment spells in my
Oh yeah,
worlds are,
enchantment's so much worse than that,
yeah, the
and I don't get why
necromancy.
necromancy seen as evil and enchantment's fine. Like enchantment is so much worse than necromancy.
Yeah. So like in like so casters in my world are like mages or whatever. There's not a whole lot of them, so there's enough for them to be like regulated or whatever. And if you're caught being a spellcaster casting like casting enchantment spells on people, like mind altering enchantment spells, like that's the worst thing you could do. Like they will hunt you down, like you'll get hunted down and you'll get axed because like you're taking away someone's free will, and that's worse. So actually the elves in my world, you know how traditionally elves are kind of considered to be like immortal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the elves in my world aren't actually immortal. They just are perceived as immortal because what actually happens is every time one of them, they have extended long lives, but every time one of them dies, they will just use necromancy to keep them around as advisors. So like all the previous elven kings and everything like that, they're all still alive. So there's like five of them in total. It's called the Elven Tribunal or whatever, but there's like five dead elven kings that are no longer kings anymore, and there's no longer an elven kingdom anymore, but they're still around and they're still advisors. Is because elves in my world don't believe in just getting rid of that knowledge. They want to keep it around. So it's, you have an so all the elves in my world, like all of their they have no writing. They don't write anything down. It's all orally passed down from like, family member, so on and so forth.
I like
And
that.
and it's easy for them to do that because none of them die. Like when they do die of either old age or like through to battle wounds, they will go out of their way to recover the body so that they can raise it with necromancy and keep that knowledge with them. And so I don't like the idea of enchantment being the bad thing, or sorry, a necromancy being the bad thing when like that's recycling and enchantment is literally mental manipulation.
Yeah, like in my world, most magic well, magic is illegal because the Empire doesn't want powerful magicians learning on their own. So, for the most part, magic is illegal. But in my mind, enchantment is so much worse than necromancy. Like, to me, necromancy is on par with everything else. It can be used for good just as easily as it can be used for evil. Like, why is raising a zombie seen as evil, but casting a fireball isn't?
Yeah.
They can both harm people easily if it gets out of control. And it's like enchantment, it's hard to use enchantment for good.
Yeah, it's a
Or at least
really
it's a lot harder.
like you can really like you can make an argument for necromancy, you could be like, I actually like whenever I play Elias, that necromancer that I like playing, I play them as like a non-evil necromancer. They view human life as sanctimount, like it's the most sanctified thing as human, or not human life, but just life in general. And so Elias doesn't believe in killing anything, only reusing things that have been killed. So necromancy. That way, you're not ever having to put people's lives at risk. You're only putting, you know, they. He wants to fight wars or combat with dead bodies. Like it's just like essentially just recycling. But like, there's really no way to ethically justify even something as a simple spell as like friendly, like where you can cast, you touch someone and they become your friend, and if they fail to save, they have no choice in the matter. Or like charm person or something like that. There's no ethical way to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna manipulate your perception of me so you're more friendly towards me. For what gain? Like, why would you need an enchantment spell to make someone friendly towards you unless you were doing something nefarious? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I totally agree with that. I remember seeing something online where it was like a necromancer talking to like a paladin, where it's like the paladin's like, those are unholy creatures, and the wizard basically responds with, why? Like, your king sends off living soldiers to die. I send off already dead things to do a service.
Yeah, soulless dead things. Yeah.
Yeah.
In
And
in Starfinder, I think you'll be happy to know. In Starfinder, there's actually this entire planet of undead people that it's kind of nefarious because it's kind of like a cyberpunk esque, like no one's good kind of thing. Like it's dystopian. Um,
mhm,
but there's like this like planet that is just all dead people, all undead, and they will sell like implants. They're called necrographs. They're basically like magical implants that give you powers, but they will sell them to you for free. But if you die before you've paid, like they'll give it to you with no money down. But if you die before you've paid off the debt, your body's now theirs. It's now property of that company, or like it's like a not necessarily a company, but it's a property of that civilization. Like you forfeit your body.
that's
So that's like a
that's
really cool.
beautiful because that's like, depending on how the afterlife would work in the world, that's either a risky bet or a win-win for both
Yeah,
people.
I think from
Like
recall,
that.
if I recall, like whenever you're undead, like I think your body is separate from. Um, I think you still die and go to one of the other planes of existence, and then your body is left behind. But but yeah, you're right. Like that could go either way. That could be either like indentured servitude forever, or oh,
Or
they're
it's
just
just,
a
you
meat
got
bag.
this sick thing.
Yeah.
And if you live, and if you die, you die.
But but yeah, I love that idea of necromancy is just kind of like an efficiency thing. And I,
Especially for like labor, like farming, and like just like medial jobs. Necromancy would just save so much time and effort for a lot of people.
so I have the farming done by druids in my world because they're the ones that are going to do it best. And I I'm trying to build like a I won't necessarily say like ethical, but like a very like new player friendly world, where all the races work together. They're all in like a coalition and an alliance or whatever. They have to work together because the aberrations, the enemies on the dark side of the planet, the land of forever night, those are the real enemies. All they are is just masses of hunger that come, like think of like Attack on Titan, how the Titans are just they
That's what
just
I was thinking of when you were talking about like the Great Citadel, and I
that's
was just
essentially
thinking
what it
of like
is.
the giant walls from Attack on Titan.
Yeah, and all of the races except the mountain dwarves specifically have to work together, The only reason why the mountain dwarves are the only kingdoms left is because they're up in the mountains and they're in the mountains and they're largely ignored. So they're the only kingdoms to have survived. And so they're super xenophobic. They don't let anyone but a mountain dwarf in. And if a mountain dwarf leaves, they're out. They can't come back. They don't trust anything on the outside because they know the monsters can corrupt things. So like after so like whenever the Land of Forever Day gets invaded by the Land of Forever Night, it like leeches corruption and like think of it like it just like corrupts any living things in the space. Like just them being on that side kind of corrupts everything. And so for months and sometimes years afterward, there's these like you'll have like regular bears or animals or whatever that are mutated and are monstrous and they all want hunger. And so that's what the players are dealing with whenever they're not dealing with the big aberrations, you know, during that month. And like just so like yeah, the dwarves are the only ones that are xenophobic and don't want anyone because they're like we don't want anyone, like we'll trade up into the door, like you can pass things through but nothing else.
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
That reminds me of my I had a psych teacher in high school where he was like, I hate everyone equally. And that was like his motto. He didn't really actually hate anyone, but that was like the persona that I put on. Anytime he would say anything, he would like try to like egg people on by saying like controversial things, which isn't great. But he would always say like, I hate everyone equally. And that's kind of what it sounds like for these mountain dwarves.
Yeah. Because like surface dwarves, they've largely migrated with everyone else. Um, and then I've also done some other things for my world. I've actually flipped dark elves and sun elves, or like I call them sun elves. But so sun elves are um, they're melanated. They have you know browns and tans and everything like that because they
Mhm.
are you know
Yeah,
sun elves. They are
that makes
constantly
sense.
in the sun that is always shining. There's no nighttime usually in my world. A lot of people are tan.
Yeah.
And all of the dark elves, they're subterranean. They're not slavers. They're not evil. They're just subterranean. They decided, hey, we don't want to deal with the Great Citadel. It gets attacked every 10 years. We're going to go into the ground. We're going to leave all
I
y'all up
mean,
there.
that's a smart decision,
Yeah.
honestly.
So you got the dark elves. They're all you know pale. Like there's other like humans down there. There's like pale skin tieflings and like there's civilization. There's basically like an undercity, not underneath the Great Citadel, but like there's undercities outside the Great Citadel that you can access and stuff like that. So like I've you know flipped that whole script and like yeah, there's no evil races in my campaign at all other than the creatures from the Land of Forever Night.
I like that.
Yeah.
Going back to something about the druids and undead, I saw a post online that was talking about a type of druidic necromancy, essentially, where it's less bringing bodies back to life and more a combination of using using like vines and plants as like tendons and things to be able to move the body, and then like merging it with the mind that's still there.
That's interesting. Pathfinder kind of does the same thing with alchemists. There is a distinction between like regular undead and alchemical undead. Alchemical undead like use reagents and like chemicals and they like use electricity and stuff like that, like classic Dr. Frankenstein stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the radiant damage that usually does damage to zombies doesn't work on them because they're just a reanimated corpse instead of a resurrected corpse. So that's interesting that you like. I didn't even think of using nature in that way. That would be
Mm-hmm.
really
Because
cool.
there are like legit parasites that do that. Like there's a type of
The
parasite that like takes over ants.
yeah, the cordyceps
Yeah.
fungus. Yeah, that
And
would
so
be really
like
cool.
merging that with magic could make very cool like very cool reflavored undead. And maybe instead of having like a weakness to like radiant or something, you give them weakness to fire, which would cause its own differences and things.
So maybe you could have like a druid that's more into like spores,
Yeah,
like mycology and spores and stuff like that. So they can still use like mind control, but it's just spores that they're using. That's like a really cool way to reflavor your magic. That I like that idea. Now you if I ever get to play a druid,
because that also, I feel like that kind of fits with druids, like very much like, oh, I lost my train of thought.
fits with druids. The
But like basically like you like using nature to like the greatest extent
Yeah, like
and things
nature
like that.
reclaims humanity.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. You could definitely play that character more of like a hatred for civilization. Um, like every chance they get, they just kind of like do everything they can to like destroy manufactured items. That'd be kind of cool to play. Now you got me wanting to play druid. The thing is like if I play druid, so my favorite class is a diviner wizard, and I
Okay.
am really good at playing a divination wizard. Like really good to the point where I don't feel comfortable playing a divination wizard or a druid because I also like really like playing druids as well, but I don't feel comfortable playing those two classes for anyone that I unless I know that they're an experienced dungeon master, they don't care, they're all right, like I'm not going to just kind of throw things at them that cuz I'm like really good. Some of the magic items I've made like as a player, like an I don't want to say like an artificer, but like in previous editions like it was the wizard's job to make magic items, but I'm really good at that. I remember I made one of my favorites that I like talking about is the anti magic hat. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I saw your video about it where it was like a dome or something that like you like reduced down and wore it as hats. And then if you ever step into an anti-magic field, it would expand and create like a protective bubble around you.
Yeah, and then you could just like teleport out or whatever. Like situations like that my player like I've had DMs, like I've I do stuff like that. I love crafting weird stuff like that. Like I made a
Mm-hmm.
so I've done that before. Um and that really pissed off the not like in a mean way, but like really pissed off the dungeon master because they thought, oh, I'm gonna get them, like they're gonna get me, you know. But nope, outsmarted you.
Mm-hmm.
I prepare for things like that. I played this game for 15 years. And then another one that I've done is there's this ring, there's this sets of rings. It's called the prisoner ring and the jailers, yeah, the jailer and prisoners rings. And what the jailer and prisoners ring is like, the prisoners ring is a cursed item. So anytime someone puts on a prisoner's ring, it relays the location back to the jailer's ring, and they can like monitor the status of anyone that is wearing a jailer's prisoner's ring that's associated with a jailer's ring. And then what I did is I took that item, that magic item or whatever, and then I started modifying them. I got a whole bunch of different rings. I started adding, like spending my gold and everything to basically enchant more stuff onto them. And what I did was, I think it was no, it was enchantment. Basically, like charm person, no, dominate person. So I enchanted like all my rings with dominate person, and since they're the jailer rings, they're cursed already, and they monitor the position. So basically, I started just handing a whole bunch of these out to all the influential. Like I gave some to my party members. I gave some to my gave some to like some of the influential NPCs. It was like, here you go, because I also did like non-detection on them as well, so no one knew that they were bad items. I did like a whole bunch of stuff, spent like hundreds of thousands of gold, and started handing these out everywhere. Dungeon Master like kind of just lets me do what I'm doing, and like this won't be an issue. And then I reveal at the very end, like, oh no, They're all I control all of these NPCs. All the players are my goons. Like
You were the big bad the whole time.
yeah, but I love doing stuff like that, and I can't do stuff like that in like a regular, like a fresh player's game or a fresh Dungeon Master's game because I feel that's unethical in some way because that's not something anyone can really prepare for ahead of time. And the thing was, is I was letting them know I was like, hey, I'm trying to do this thing. I want to take these rings. Like you give us these rings. I want to enchant them further. Can I do that? I'm like, oh yeah, go ahead. I'm like, all right, I'm putting a dominate person on it. Like, all right. I don't think they put two and two together. What I was doing, but yeah, it was that kind of
Wow.
stuff. And then of course you got like the what was it the arrow with the bag of holding and the bottomless pocket. So it creates like a
Hmm.
black hole when you put those together, like those old tricks.
Yeah.
Like yeah, you can't really do those in new player games.
Yeah. I found one in fifth edition. So banishment, if you concentrate on it for a minute, and you're if you're from another plane of existence and you concentrate on it for a minute, the person will stay there permanently. So what I figured out is in our party we had a water genasi who was from the plane of water, and we needed to get to the plane of water. So we got everyone in the bag of holding. They cast banishment on themselves, concentrated on it for a minute, and then we were in the
See,
and we had no control over where we would be in the plane of water. But basically, he would get there, and if anything looked familiar, the plan was to stay. And if it wasn't, he would break concentration and we'd go back. And there was a lot of points where the Dia, where my brother could have been like, "No, you can't do that," but he never did. And so then basically we had a very limited plane shift 3 spell levels earlier.
yeah, and I love letting players do stuff like that. I absolutely love letting players do stuff like that because if you let them do that, then you obviously enjoyed it and then
Mm-hmm.
you start thinking of more creative ways to handle situations and that's when Dungeons and Dragons becomes fun. That's my
Mm-hmm.
favorite time is when everyone's sitting around the
Oh,
table
definitely.
like, all right, we need to break in here, we need to steal this magic item. All right, we're going to Ocean's 11 it. What spells do we got on hand? What NPCs do we know that would help us out? Like that's when you like everyone's just brainstorming for 2 hours having a blast and then like, all right, I hope this works. I hope it goes off the correct way. And then, you know, everyone's just sitting there sweating, looking at that dice right as you're about to roll it. Best parts of Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Now you got me just goofing and thinking about a whole bunch of old stuff, shenanigans I used to get up to. I don't know. Do you got any like some of your favorite moments that stick out in your mind? Like top like what's your top 5 favorite moments in Dungeons and Dragons for you?
So that was definitely one when I figured out that we could use a bag of holding to do that. Um, there was one time, so I haven't played a bunch of times, but there was one time as a rogue. The party was doing low on health. We were fighting a young blue dragon, and we were like level 5. Party was doing bad on health, except really for me. And so I taunt the dragon and take the dodge action, and I just wait, and I'm just like, please kill her, please kill the dragon, please kill the dragon, please kill the dragon. And luckily, the warlock rolled like a nat 20 and like a nat 18, so that got a lot of damage on it, and we were able to kill it. But that was fun, just staring down, taunting a dragon. Um, there was one time in the second edition game where we had found mushrooms that gave us complete invincibility and invulnerability to everything. But we were insanely high and had no control of our actions. So what we did was we took our dwarven fighter, tied an axe to his head, gave him a mushroom. We were fighting a giant snake, like it was like a giant fire breathing snake. We tied an axe to his head, gave him one of the mushrooms, and threw him at the snake. And so the snake ate him, and it cut him in half on as he swallowed the dwarven fighter. And it was so funny. And our DM was so mad at that because it was like he wrote like a page and a half about this monster and like all the different abilities it could do, and we beat it in 15 minutes by using an insane outside the box method. Um, those also came back later because one of my friends accidentally ate two of them and like transcended reality for a short period of time. And like it like permanently changed his alignment.
Became one
And
with the
he was
universe.
just a really fun character. What do you say?
Became one with the universe.
Basically, um, we also had so in that game, he gave us a shotgun, and it was called the boomstick, and it was like this like super magical weapon. Um, and the person who you so we had a cleric with us who like was like an NPC because one of the players canceled, and the paladin who had the boomstick rolled a nat one on firing it,
Oof.
and we were like level two, and
He's a goner.
oh yeah, we called it the red mist because when it fired, all that was left was a pair of boots and some red mist. And then of course there was Charles, who was just the best boy. He was great.
Yeah, I
What
always
are some
love.
of your favorite moments?
Um, I mean, do you want more of like low level stuff, low level shenanigans, or high level shenanigans? Because I've done both.
Bit of both. Favorite
Um,
each,
all
or
right,
two favorite of each.
let's see. Um, Tricking a Tarask into. So, I was playing Wizard. I had to gain access to Gate, and we were dealing with a Tarask because we're 17th level plus. That's what you do at 17th
Mhm.
level plus is you attack a Tarask. And so like the whole classic of like drawing the Tarask away from civilization, having it chase you down, like, I was just standing there like, come get me, that whole thing. And then like at the very last instant casting gate and then teleporting out of the way so the Tarask like goes through. Um, worked worked great without a hitch. It was great. It was amazing. The only part though was I sent it to hell. I sent the Tarask to hell, and there were a couple demons that were not happy about that.
I mean, I feel like that's a high level campaign right there. Just
Yeah,
being constantly hunted by demons.
yeah. There was a couple angry archdevils at that point. Um, so yeah, that was fun for a while. We had a couple like Rakshasa and like succubus attempts for assassinations. Um,
They're
Afterward,
not taking out. They're not taking out 17th level characters.
they're not taking out a 17th level diviner wizard at
Yeah,
all. It's impossible. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, like a diviner wizard, once you get there's a spell that you can get that basically I can't remember the exact details of it, but it's essentially like you cast it on yourself and it's like kind of permanent. I think you have to cast it like once per day. It's like prescience. Yeah, prescience. Um if I remember the use of the spell correctly, like if you were to be attacked with while you're using prescience, like you automatically go first. You have an action that you can do, and then I had that spell coupled with what's the one contingency? Yeah, there's a spell contingency. So you had prescience and contingency, and with those two spells, being a diviner, I was untouchable. Like I would just have it like
yeah.
contingency, teleport out, prescience. Like as soon as my prescience go off, I'm teleported to a safe zone. Can't touch me. Like takes the whole party with me. That kind of stuff. Like so yeah, and then another time, same character, different situation. Do you know the term scrying and frying?
I know scrying. I don't
So
know the say.
so scrying and frying is where like you're going into a dungeon, right? You have the wizard or whoever has divination spells scry ahead of time. So you send out all your like arcane eyes, you do all this kind of stuff. You scout out the entire dungeon. You figure out where the big bad evil guy is. You teleport in. You have everyone blow off all their most powerful spells, all their most powerful abilities, and then you teleport right back out. That's scrying and frying.
Beautiful.
So there was plenty of those types of shenanigans going on. Low level stuff wasn't me. It was actually a group that I DM'd for. One of my favorite moments. I talk about it, I brag about it all the time. My players were tasked with clearing out a goblin encampment. Like they basically had taken over this area in town. The town wanted them gone. They were like occupying this building or whatever. And all the players were like, going to go take care of the goblins. Um, except none of them killed a single goblin. They went through the entire dungeon, talked with every goblin, didn't kill a single one, got the goblins on their side, got them to leave, and then dealt with the situation that the got like made the goblins come here in the first place. I was so proud of them. They were like, "Oh, these goblins are here in this town. Well, why is that? Let's go figure that out." Went talk to the goblins. They're like, "Hey, the town doesn't want you here. Why are you here?" And the goblin's like, "Well, we got kicked out of our previous place, so we came here, and then people try to kill us." And they're like, "All right, let's go solve that problem for you, bud." And then just like went and helped the goblins. I was like,
Oh, that's so wholesome. That's
I have,
amazing.
I know, I
I
have
love
never been more
that.
proud. Yeah, never been more proud of a group. I love that group. Anyway, and then another time with a low level group to finish off my stories. Um, let's see. Uh, this one's a pretty funny one. My players, again, me being DM, I don't have very much experience playing, uh, but my players were trying to solve an issue with the town. They knew that something like the well had dried up. So there's no water in the well. It was a big issue for the town. Nobody knew what was happening. So the players like looked down, they couldn't see the bottom, trying to figure it out. They go talk around locally or whatever. Well, come to find out that something opened up at the bottom of the well, like basically a cavern opened up. All the water spilled out into the cavern, flooded the cavern, and the like location was being guarded. Like nobody was allowed to go near the well. Well, one of the players decided the halfling rogue decided, hey, we can't like get like walk up to the well. I think it was like the big fighter, just throw me into the well. Don't worry, I'll be okay. So I was like, "Are you real? Do you really want to do that?" And like, "Yeah, yeah, it'll be a great plan. Get right over, like lob me right over straight into the well." I was like, "Okay," just like counting up like how many dice I need, like behind the dungeon master screen. Like, all right, here's one for 10 feet, another one for the keep counting dice or whatever, and toss the thing. I gave them two saves. I gave them the save at the mouth of the well to like catch themselves. Then I gave them another save, another chance, an opportunity to go further down to prevent them from falling in from the bot, like hold on to the walls, like spread out against the walls to prevent them from falling through the bottom of the well. Failed both saves. His character instantly died. I've used that same encounter a different time, and players also had the idea of throwing another person down the well, but they came to their senses.
I mean, that's the kind of thing where it's like, if you cast Featherfall as they're being thrown, then it's a great idea.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that, that is just asking for a character to die.
I don't even think the group had a spellcaster at all. They had no clerics. They had, I think the closest thing that they had a spellcaster was a alchemist. That's not really a spellcaster, but yeah, no casters at all.
That's so weird.
It was
I mean, most of my groups that I've both played in and DM'd, they have been almost entirely spellcasters. Like there will be like one or two martial characters, and most of the time, even one of them's like a paladin.
how off,
So,
how big of groups do you run? 4 to 6 or more?
um, 4 to 5.
That's roughly what I run to.
Yeah, but like the campaign that I'm currently running, so it is a warlock, a sorcerer, a wizard, a druid, and a monk. And the group that I play in, wizard, warlock, druid, rogue, and a paladin. Paladin fighter.
Yeah, if I ever get the opportunity to play, I'm either going to play a druid or a wizard.
Mhm.
But
I play spellcasters every time because I teach a lot of people how to play, and so I just have a better knowledge of magic than basically everyone that I play with. And so being able to do that, I'm able to get out to a lot of shenanigans.
yeah,
And also it just helps teaching other people, like basically teaching by example with
yeah,
how to
what you
use
can
spells
do with,
creatively and things.
yeah. One thing I really disliked was with fifth edition, as opposed to like kind of fourth and mainly third, is what I'm talking about, is spell stacking. They had this like the way the spells were made in previous editions, like 3.5 or Pathfinder or whatever you want to call, is they didn't. Not a lot of them had like concentration, so you can stack spells with each other. So you could
Yeah, I
like,
believe you talked about this on the episode with five javelins.
oh, I did actually, yeah. I didn't.
Yeah,
I
because
didn't know
I,
you
I
listened to that.
I've listened to a couple of the episodes. I have not listened to all of them yet. But I do have thoughts on that because I have really only played Fifth Edition, and so I like concentration. I do think there are. I think too many spells have concentration,
Yeah.
but I like the idea of concentration, and I also think if you have concentration, it forces teamwork a little bit more because you can combine. Because if you have other spellcasters, if you don't have other spellcasters, then this doesn't apply. But if you have a bunch of spellcasters, you can combine concentration effects and really wreck people.
I can
And
understand that perspective of like, it's to kind of force spellcasters to have to rely on other spellcasters. I
mhm.
get that.
and I do like that because when my party uses like combination concentration spells, it is felt in the battle a lot. And they can do like some really high damage stuff when they do that.
Yeah.
And so that was one little thing that I wanted to add on
No, that's
was it forces a more cooperative game. But I do think there are a lot of concentration spells,
like, I get
and
that.
especially at high levels. And that, to me, that is more of the problem. Is there are too many concentration spells, but I like the concept of concentration.
See, I don't like the concept of concentration. I don't like the concept of attunement. Like I'm one of those people, like, you got 10 fingers, that's 10 ring, baby.
Mhm.
10 rings, baby. Um and like, yeah, is it overpowered and broken? Absolutely. Is it fun for the players? Absolutely. Like, I don't know. I don't like concentration. Like, I don't like, I just say like, no, you cast in the spell magic, it goes off, like, unless it's like a specific spell that makes sense. So usually how I do the discernment is, do you need constant, like, do you need to constantly maintain the spell in some way? So like there's like flaming sphere, for instance. Like, you can still move that after you've cast the spell. So that should need concentration. Whereas something like, I don't know, Charm Person or something. I don't know if that does Charm Person have concentration?
I don't believe it does, but I think I get what you're saying.
Yeah, for instance, like, Charm Person goes off or whatever. I feel like that should just be kind of like a one and done, as opposed to like constantly having to do it. Because then, like, you're a spellcaster, and the whole point of a spellcaster is to be casting spells, but you can't cast spells if you are maintaining concentration. So, like, I get like it's a give and take. Like, it's
I
a
mean,
way
you
to
can still cast
balance the
spells.
game.
You just can't cast concentration spells.
I know, but there's so many concentration spells.
That is the problem. And with attunement, I like the attunement mechanic built in, but I do think there should be like a little thing where it's like attunement doesn't actually matter because you're the DM. You decide how many magic items they have and what types of magic items they have. So attunement isn't really necessary if you go into it thinking attunement isn't a thing.
Yeah.
Whereas with concentration, that's on the players, not on the DM. And so that puts a cap on what the players can do that the DM wouldn't have control. Like the DMs don't have control over what the players do with their spells. So concentration is a cap on the players, whereas attunement is again a cap on the players, but it's completely within the DM's control.
Yeah. I don't like putting rules in the hands of players to a certain extent. Like, I am of the mentality of like, how do I put this? I don't think the game mechanics should be putting as much emphasis on restriction as much as it does. Like, attunement's pretty hefty. The amount of concentration spells are pretty hefty. Like, I don't even like spell slots, to go even further than that. Like, I don't like the idea of spell slots. That's too much. To me, that's too much of a game mechanic that prevents player creativity. So I use a spell.
I I do prefer spell points,
Yeah.
but I have found at least for new players, spell points are relatively complicated, and like there's a lot more like there's more math involved than spell slots.
How?
Spell slots just like you get X number the spell level, whereas spell points it's you have your total pool and it's like subtracting from that, and it has seemed, at least to me, it has seemed more complicated for new players than spell slots.
I've honestly found the opposite, because like every time I try to teach new players, I'm like, all right, at first level, you can only cast 4 first level spells. They're like, okay, what does that mean? Like, all right, I don't know. Like, you can cast you cast one first level spell 4 times, but only if you prepare 4 different times. Like, 4 different. Like, that's way too complex. Instead of just being like, all right, you got 10 points level. Like, let's like really easy level one. You got 5 points. You have access to first level spells. Each one of those costs like 1 point each. At second level, doesn't matter. Any spell you want costs 2 points if it's second level, and you just subtract that from your total. I feel like that's a lot easier than trying to explain Vancian spell slots to people, because that's from the 60s, 50s, 60s, like when that Rick Vance wrote that book that it's based off of. I think it's like The World at the End of Time or something is where Vancian magic comes from. It's like
I
a
know what you're talking about. I forget the name of it.
But yeah, like, it's a really, really old concept that just doesn't, like, everyone nowadays is used to just like Harry Potter magic, where it's just like you say it and you do it. There's no restriction on to how many times you can do it. And so I like that kind of magic. Where it's just like, yeah, you have a resource, you can't spend too much of that resource, and then that's it. It's not broken down into different slots for everyone. My personal opinion, but
No, I agree. I like spell points more
and then
just
I
because it does fit that vibe that most people come into the game with.
yeah. And then I also do something I don't think I've ever really talked about it before. Uh I have actually my counterspell wager system. You've seen that video, right?
I think
Where
so.
you whenever you decide to counterspell someone, you can decide how I think I did it with slots, but how I normally do it in my game is with points. So, whenever you counterspell is an ability, it's not a spell.
Mhm.
Like if you have caster 1 casting a spell at caster 2 can identify the spell, how many points it cost, and choose to either um, counterspell with more points to just automatically succeed, or if they don't know, they can kind of guess if they know fireball, what it looks like, because I don't ever actually describe what spell is being cast or whatever, just kind of the effects of it. But unless they make the check, so they can either spend over the amount of points it costs to cast a spell to just completely negate it, or they can do the same amount. So like let's say it's fireball, so it's 3 points, third level. Um, you can spend 3 points, and then they go into that wager system that I was talking about, and they wager however many points they want. And each point equates to a number of d6s, and then whoever wins that wins the points from the other person and keeps their points that they wagered.
Yes.
Um, I
Yes,
do
I did see that.
I do the same thing for combat maneuvers as well. For I have a stamina system as well. So fighters, they can do things like disarm. They can do things like trip. They can do things like something simple like throwing dirt in their eyes, like dirty tricks. But I do the same thing with a stamina system as like with a spell point system, but like a stamina system for martial classes, where you can do counter maneuvers, and it's like this, stamina battle that you're doing with whoever you're fighting. Like, let's say disarm cost 2 points, 2 stamina points. Someone identifies you're trying to disarm them. They spend 2 points too. You get into this like locked swords battle that you're trying to do with someone. Like I like how that seems thematically, and then you can wager
Hmm.
stamina points by like how much energy and effort you're putting into it, and whoever wins that roll, that wager, then they keep their stamina points, and then they take the stamina points of the person that they're trying to disarm. So I like that more fluid system of combat, than just rigid, really rigid uh, game design things where it's like
Yeah.
you have to use this type of action, and then if you don't use that type of action, you don't have enough amount of those
Hmm.
actions, then you can't do it, or you're not proficient in disarming, so you just can't do it.
Hmm.
I don't like that.
Same. I do something kind of similar for Counterspell. The way I run Counterspell when I'm the DM is it is a contested ability check, like for whatever spellcasting modifier they're using. It is just you roll a d20, you add your spellcasting modifier, higher one wins. If it's a tie, you redo. I believe. Oh wait, no, it was a tie. If it's a tie, it goes to the person casting Counterspell, and that is how I do it because then it's a lot more. It is like a the outcome is a lot harder to determine in advance. And I just think that fits better.
What I do in my instances, if they tie on the roll or whatever, they go into a second wager. So it's like that was their entire turn. They're if they're doing a wizard battle, they're casting they're doing the Harry Potter back and
Mm-hmm.
forth laser bolt thing. What I'm
Yeah.
talking about, where it's engaged. Like whenever they're casting counterspell, that's their turn, and then if like they tie, it stays there. They're still doing that turn. It goes to the next turn, and then they got to make that wager again to go back and forth. Same thing
What
for
happens if someone gets attacked in that turn?
then they would have to make concentration checks to
Okay.
maintain it, just like taking damage normally for concentration. Um,
Okay.
like
What happens
there's
if they lose concentration? Would the other person become the victor?
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
So it's like this, like if you got two wizards battling on the battlefield, it's kind of like we got to protect them or like attack the other one.
Mhm.
And yeah, I like making mechanics that make combat dynamic. Like
Yeah.
that's what I really enjoy with game design, and what I do in my games is I really focus on making combat really dynamic.
Oh, I like that a lot. Because earlier we were talking about like the good side of D&D TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
The one time I've had like actual like relatively large number of people from like the not so good side of D&D
Yeah.
TikTok was that video on Counterspell where I was asking a rules question, and like people weren't as bad as I've seen people in other videos, but I got like over 700 comments between the two videos,
Wow,
and
that's
the
a lot.
best part, like my favorite part, was about 400 were saying yeah you can do that, and 300 were saying no, and so many people had different reasonings for whatever answer they had, and it was like what I learned from it is there is no real consensus.
Yeah, there isn't. There never is. Like all those people that tout read as written, that depends
Mm-hmm.
on the reader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it depends on the reader. Like you can't just be like that's read as written. Like unless you are getting the opinion of the person who wrote it and their intentions, then it's all interpretation because it's just like, a Bible or any other, information data points. If it's read as written, it depends on who's reading it, and so it's all opinion anyway. Yeah. I really dislike it when people, get it in there, this is the way it's got to be done. No. Are we playing Adventurers League? Then I don't care.
Yeah. Ah. But yeah, the reason why I asked that video that not a lot of people know was because I was playing a wizard. This was in my brother's campaign. The bad guy used chain lightning. Our warlock counterspelled the chain lightning, and then the evil wizard counterspelled that counterspell. So the chain lightning went off, and it killed my character outright, and the character who cast counterspell. Now because of Revivify, everything turned out to be okay. But that was why I cared so much about that answer, was because if that if that was against the rules, either that was a rule that I am now going to have in my back pocket anytime I'm fighting a wizard, or we're about to get 2 diamonds back, which are very valuable. So, because my brother, whenever he makes like a wrong call like that, he will like try to retcon it to the best of his ability. Um, and so I wanted to throw that out there, and those videos did so much better than I thought they were going to. I got so many more comments than I thought.
Yeah,
Like to the
seven.
point where, like, I stopped looking at the comments.
Yeah, 700 is a lot. Do you? What was your favorite answer that
Um,
you ended up seeing? I know you probably didn't see all of them.
so I did see some people who were with my line of thinking, which was basically both spells require somatic components, so you couldn't do them simultaneously.
I That's
That was,
pretty much what my ruling would be. Like you can't counter a counter.
I'm fine with countering counterspell, but the person casting the spell being countered cannot cast counterspell simultaneously while casting the first spell because they both require somatic components. Um, that's my personal view of it, and I did see people who wrote that, which was nice and reassuring. Um, but there were my favorite people were the people who were just like, I don't know, ask the DM.
Yeah, I mean that's ultimately the answer. Like, what does the DM say? What did he rule? Like, that's between you and the DM.
There were also a couple like comment sections, like individual comment sections, that got like really heated about it. Like they got really like there were a couple where I saw them pop up in my notifications enough time that like I actually like started looking at what they were writing, and there were a couple times I almost like stepped in to be like, "Chill, guys, like this does not matter."
Yeah, I actually made a video today actually about some, I think it was Brooklyn, like what are your, as a player, what are your red flags for a dungeon master? And I think I had one, it was like um I was basically saying like any dungeon master who is a host, like hosting, so it's obviously not during code, but like who is a host that refuses to supply snacks. Not that they, I know everyone has their different financial situations and not everyone wants to supply snacks, and that's fine. But I'm talking about specifically the people who refuse to supply snacks. And
I
lo
agree
and
with
what?
it. To me, it should be like everyone chips in money. Like basically at that session, everyone chips in money for the next session.
Yeah, and
And
or like you rotate, and so like the dungeon master will cover it sometimes and the players will cover it sometimes. Like I'm fine with that, but I was
yeah,
specifically talking to the dungeon masters who refuse to participate in the gathering of food or snacks or whatever. And lo and behold, on that thing, I got someone who's like, it's not the responsibility of the dungeon master. They are supplying the world and the game for the players. That should be enough. I'm like, that's exactly what I was talking about, bud.
bro, the point of the game is to have fun with your friends.
I know.
Yeah, the DM puts in more work, and there are definitely, and like if the players decide the DM isn't going to buy snacks, that's a super nice thing to do. But if the DM refuses to, that's a bit like I'm better than you
That's what I was getting
because
at.
I do not like that mindset.
Yeah, neither do I. That's exactly the kind of toxic behavior I was talking about, and like proved my point. It was really funny. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I really dislike it when other dungeon masters get that high and mighty about themselves, like I am providing a service. It's like, dude, I could go find a dungeon master anywhere on the internet. You're not gonna be. I could dungeon master. I don't if I really care that much. I don't know. Maybe it was. I think it's probably holdover from before D&D was mainstream, because before it was mainstream, getting and finding a dungeon master or someone who's willing to run games was actually pretty difficult. Like unless you're going to Adventurers League or Pathfinder Society, or you could find someone locally, like online Dungeons and Dragons wasn't really a big thing for a long time. I remember signing up for the beta for Roll20 like years ago when I was stationed in Korea, or South Korea. Like that was when Roll20 just came out, and that was like 2013, 2014, I believe.
oh,
And so like online Dungeons and Dragons is like a fairly new thing, and I feel like that kind of behavior is definitely left over from that, that era of like, well, I'm the dungeon master, I'm the one providing a service for all these people, these wayward players or whatever. It's just gross.
yeah.
What's your biggest like red flag for a dungeon master?
Probably like very much like railroady DMs. And also I really don't like DMPCs. I do not like them at all. Like my players keep forcing me
To
to
have
like,
one?
and it is annoying. But at the same time, like so there is an NPC with my party who is he was a human who got experimented on by like an evil wizard organization and got turned into a dragonborn essentially. Like mechanically, he got turned into a dragonborn. In the world, he just like got turned into like a half dragon. Um, and so he is kind of felt like out, like shunned by society. And so through a series of events I won't get into, he joins the party. And whenever they're in combat, unless if there is a someone from that organization, I always have him fight the like background people. And that is how like I try to like stay away from like the DMPC thing. He's also a very passive person. He's specifically like a samurai fighter, and so like he's very passive. And if people talk to him, he will definitely give his opinion on things, but he will not outwardly give it. He's relatively introverted, and I feel like I found a relatively good balance, but I would still prefer him to not have him in the party. And like I have tried like twice to get him out of the party, and the party keeps rolling high on persuasion to make him come with, and he's like at like an additional like 8 sessions because of it. And they're finally getting to the point where it's like, all right, I'm not even gonna let you roll to convince him to stay. Like he has a thing that he needs to do.
Yeah, I don't let my players roll unless I want there to be a random outcome or like unless I want them to succeed. And like I have the mentality of like there's some things NPCs like just won't do. Like if you're a guard and the players are trying to convince them to leave their post so they can go do something, the guard's not going to listen. That's their job. Like there's no amount of convincing for some things. Maybe a guard's a bad example, but like there's usually like no amount of convincing a skill check could make. um but like I've had situations like that where like players really like an NPC and they want to keep the NPC. I'm like, no, man, they gotta they got other business they gotta square up first.
Yeah, the problem was kind of with the designing of this NPC because he didn't have anything else to do when the party met them. And like my plan was to like give them the option to have him go with for a little bit, but it was just like later on they kept rolling high and I couldn't think of a reason to not let them roll. He just kept rolling high. And it was just like, all right, fine, you guys got a couple more sessions with Otis. Like
That's great. Well, I mean, that's not your fault for having a DMPC. That's your player's fault.
yeah. I mean, like I really like the character though, and he brings a perspective, and he's fun to have. But I wish I had made him less of a fighter and more of just like a person who got experimented on by these wizards. So like he was just a civilian. So he wouldn't take part in the combat, but he would be traveling with the party, and so like they could ask them about things. And yeah, I wish I had done that, but I did not do that. So
Your camera is frozen, but this is actually about when we should be getting off anyway. You want to do closing remarks? You want to shout yourself out one final time?
um so I'm still at Meg the Sorceress pretty much everywhere. I'm especially on TikTok. That's like the main place to find. Yeah.
Definitely go follow them. They make great content. Absolutely love all their stuff. And yeah, this is Dougie's Dungeon Podcast. Hope you enjoy it. This will be upload. I keep saying this every time. I know it's going to be uploaded on Friday, and the people watching and listening to this know this, but I keep saying it anyway because I have nothing else to say. But anyway, yeah, I think we should get out of here. At least stop recording. We can still talk. All right, adios.